Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be another transmission episode. This is the 915 Transaxle out of Mac. I've driven it for like 4,000 miles and it pops out of third gear. And last week we discovered that it's got some problems with the sycnros, and also the input shaft has some chipping and breakage in it. That's allowing things to move out of range, which is why it pops out of third gear. So today's goal, I'm going to try to get things completely torn down, make a list of the parts that I need, and start finding some of the replacements. I've already found a few, but let's get into it.
Garage time.
I've already determined that the adjustment of these shift forks isn't great, so I'm not going to do any marking or anything. I'm just going to remove these parts so we can get these gear clusters out. My wrench has a hard time getting into that recess, so I'm going to go for the open end. There we go. I'm going to loosen this one, but I think it'll slide off anyways. This one, the wrench gets a much better grip on it. And I'm just going to put it into a gear so there's not as much pressure on the fork as I... Guys, I tried to put this tool over the selector shafts. This is for the 741 transmission, but it just doesn't fit. It's different spacing, different diameters. So unfortunately, I was unable to support those, but we will build something later on to support those. I already took the shift detents out of this rod, which is the 3/4. Now I'm going to take it out of the 1/2, and we'll bag them separately, make sure we don't get them confused. You can feel something round in there. But this doesn't want to come out right now. There it is. And I'm going to put a piece of tape in there that says 1/2. That's how I like to label stuff, or put it in a bin. Okay, this retaining plate has some 12mm nuts on it. We'll work all those loose. Be careful we don't bash the wrench into those threads. Some of these are pretty hard to get to. Okay, these retainers are separate. And I like that they're separate because this reminds me of the 741 trans where they weren't separate and the clamping loads on the bearings were different. So I like that already. Now these clusters should just come right out. So we're left with these shims, and these are the shims that set the pinion depth. So we want to be careful not to lose these or break these or bend them. You can clearly see which direction it came based on the markings. So we'll put that on the bench and start to look inside. This is the crown gear, and it doesn't look too beat up or chipped or pitted or anything. So that's good. And then also the bearing races look pretty good. Sometimes these are really loose, and if they're spinning or coming right out, then that's bad. But so far, well, never mind. This just came right out. So that is a little bit more loose than usual. And that's on the pinion shaft. The main shaft feels a little bit tighter. Unfortunately, this is a difficult fix because it's hard to make that hole smaller without doing a bunch of machine work. So we'll have to investigate that and see I don't see really any evidence of spinning, but it should be a press fit in there. So that's also bad news, guys. And remember, I've driven this transmission and the differential and the sound of the transmission was actually good. So I don't think there's any major problem with the ring and pinion here. And then inside there, you can see the spider gears and stuff. They all look okay too. No, major galling or pitting or anything like that. There's those numbers right there etched in the gear. That's the backlash number. So let's go look at the pinion shaft and see what it looks like. I do like how easy it is to get these shafts apart. Really just unbolts, much easier than the 356 transmission. And the surfaces on the pinion gear look great. Nice and smooth, no pitting, nice and shiny. A little bit of goop on the end of the gear there, but this looks good. It actually matches the number on the crown wheel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'd actually rather have the 831, so I may change it anyways. This is the input shaft, and the big deal here is that this is completely eaten up. All of the splines on this input shaft that prevent this gear from actually moving. I think this is second gear, but that is not good because this has lost its hold on the shaft. And all this metal has been broken off and circulated throughout the, it's just been collecting in the bottom of the transmission. And this gear, this is supposed to move. It has a bearing underneath it, but it's not supposed to move this way. And that's one of the reasons why it was popping out of third gear. I'm gonna go ahead and pull all these gears off. This input shaft has to be replaced along with the first gear because this gear is machined on part of the shaft. So we'll replace this and this as a minimum. It's not a garage time video without any welding. So what I've done here is try to support the shaft so I can take this nut off. And I got it here attached to my vise. I'll clamp that down to the table. But basically just trying to put some torque on this and support the shaft without just clamping onto the gears. So let's give that a try. Also, this nut has the same sort of indent on it. So I need to kind of open that up a little bit. This is not reusable. I broke my screwdriver on that, but it's okay. Craftsman lifetime guarantee. I always abuse them for that. And so that's open enough to where I can get some torque on it, take it off. Got it supported here in the vise. This clamp down on the nut here so it doesn't damage the threads. Gonna put a little extra support underneath here, just as I don't want the shaft to bend as I push down. And then of course, this is all kind of welded and clamped to the table. So let's give it a whirl. Yeah, that really wasn't on there very tight. Not sure what the torque spec on that is, but that seemed a little loose to me. Probably because the way the shaft is damaged on the end there, it's probably lost its clamping load because it's broken. Try to keep everything in the same orientation. And that's it. So we're down now to the naked shaft, although this bearing here has not been pressed off. I could get that off if I wanted to. This is the only one left that was doing anything to hold the gear on. So it's really mangled. As the gear gets driven this way, because of the helix angle, I believe it pushes it this way. So as you put pressure on each of the teeth, it pushes it in that direction. And it must have just been a lot of lurching in second gear or spinning tires in second gear or whatever. It would just constantly bang away at that. The gear itself, I think, is okay. I don't see any damage to the gear itself, but clearly the shaft has to be replaced. And I did consider, and maybe someone has a method to strengthen this. The later shafts have a ring that goes all the way around as opposed to each of these little notches. So it's possible to perhaps machine off all these broken teeth and weld on a much more substantial ring. That's something I wouldn't attempt on my own, but if that's a common repair for people who race, I may end up salvaging the shaft and having it repaired professionally with a much stronger ring here to support the loads of that gear. I'm going to take a video of all the orientations of all the parts, and then I'm going to drop these in the ultrasonic cleaner, and then we'll do some inspection and make some decisions as to what we need to replace and what we can keep. It's kind of pre-cleaning some of this, and there's like synchro material caked inside here, so definitely some wear on the synchros, and that material is kind of packing itself in to the little space here. So when you go to clip this in gear, it doesn't snap in. It's a pretty loose fit. I suspect this is worn as well as the synchro itself. And then this synchro on this gear looks much better. It's not as worn. So there's a much firmer snap when it goes into this gear. Inspection time. Each of these have come out of the ultrasonic cleaner, and I've just coated them with WD-40 just to keep them from rusting and keep them nice and clean. So there's no pitting, no scratching, nothing. The gears all look great, keeping the bearings together. This part here is the spider, and it has all the torque goes through this thing. And it pushes up against this piece right here. It has very little wear on it, almost undetectable. So this part is good. This part I'm not sure about yet. Don't think it's great. Everything else came out clean. The bearings are actually pretty nice. I think I can see some wear on the tips of the teeth. So I can measure the height of the dog teeth just to get an idea. This one's 207, 207, 208, 207. So let me show you a close-up picture of this. I don't think it's horrible, but it does show some signs of rounding. This is third gear, and it's actually a little easier to measure because it's smaller than the teeth. So 209, 209, 209, 209. This is a little bit better. Okay, this gear is from a different transmission. I get 210. These look sharper to me. I've just written the number 6432, or I got the numbers wrong, but it's close enough, 6342. And that came out this direction, so I'm keeping the sleeve and the bearing together. I've actually looked at this bearing. It's got great looking rollers. There's no issues with the bearing, and the cage is not broken. So I want to keep these together. We'll do each of these one at a time and bag and tag them. Toothpick underneath there. Just going to wipe the WD-40 off this sycnros so you can see how worn it is. Very shiny right here. Almost lost all of its crown there. And then on the inside, it has some lines on the inside, and you can see shiny spots on the lines too. So this thing is just really worn. You can also measure the diameter of these things, but I know it's going to get replaced anyways. And then the block itself, let's take a look at this. The ends don't look bad at all. A little bit of wear marks where the syncro lines touch, but it's basically just a shiny spot. Not bad. Band looks okay. No major mushrooming or damage to the end. The internal bore of the gear looks really nice. No issues on the internal bore. Basically, it's just a question of, do I want to replace the dog teeth on this one? Okay, so that's all the little parts. This will go together. Set it right here. 6614. So that goes in just like this. Number on this side matches the number on that side. So once again, the bearing on this one are all nice and shiny. The rollers look good. And the cage is not broken at all. It's actually in good shape. So happy with reusing this gear. And then here's a view of how those blocks are arranged, just for reference. You can see some of the coating is a little bit lighter right here on top. This one is in much better shape. And like I said, it went in and out of second gear, no problems, never grinds or anything in second gear. A little bit of sludge down there in the hole, so probably you have to use some compressed air and some brake cleaner, kind of clean those up a little bit. The second, third slider has pretty nice looking teeth. These teeth are great. I think this is a little bit harder part than the dog teeth. The concern I have with this piece is more about the detent here where the syncro clips in. So I'm going to look for another one of these, probably another used one, or I'll look at the price for a brand new one. And now we're moving on to the stack of parts off the pinion shaft. So these are going to go in the ultrasonic cleaner, and I'll come back and show you how the condition of these parts look. Okay, this one is first gear, and upon cleaning it up, it actually looks really pretty good. The dog teeth on this one are actually very sharp, so I'm not sure why it had a hard time going into first gear. So this one has a directional block here on this side. I'm just measuring the height of the teeth here, 225. To me, the teeth on this one look the sharpest out of all of them. Let me show you a picture. I have made some decisions on what I'm going to replace. So I am going to replace the dog teeth on gears second and third. They are marginal and I think a little bit round, so they aren't that expensive. I think it's about $130 each for the dog teeth, and I think it's a worthwhile change. It's just gonna prolong the life of the transmission. Right now, I'm gonna try to remove these dog teeth. You're supposed to have a special tool to do that. There's a tool that snaps in that groove, and then you can push it with the press. I'm gonna do something a little different because I'm never gonna reuse these dog teeth again. I can damage them as I remove them. So I'm going to probably tack weld a plate on here and just pull it off that way. I just made a hole in this plate. What does it have to do with removing sycnros? Let me show you. So I've just welded this plate to the actual sycnro, and it's only welded to the top of it. I'm not welding where it has an interference fit. It's only at the top. So I should now be able to use a mandrel, which I had from my other transmission, and just push this straight through. Should pop right out. No damage there to the gear. It did make a little bit of a pop, I think because this plate was bending slightly, so that plate may not be thick enough. This can just be reused and cut, but I would rather have a thicker plate because you can see it did bend. I was watching it bend, and that was giving it a little too much energy to spring back. So you don't want things to bend, you just want it to push it right off. But we got it off. Next time I'll do it a little different, a little safer. I'm inside checking the workshop manual for those bearing bores in the main differential housing. And all it says is to, check damage in the center web bearing bores, replace the housing if necessary. It talks about heating up the housing to 250 degrees Fahrenheit and pressing in the races, which in my case, they are pretty loose because they come out at room temperature. So there's no specifications. There's another page that has general wear and tolerance limits. So that's on, let me flip to that page. Tolerance are like gear backlash, which those are fine, gears are fine. This is the roller bearing clearance or distance between the shafts and the main shafts. That's not an issue for me. Shift rods, I think my shift rods are okay. You can check the run out of the shift rods if you think they're bent. Not a bad idea to try it. It talks about measuring the side play between the shift sleeve and the shift slider, or the shift fork and the shift slider, or shift sleeve in this case. We can go in the garage and measure that. This I haven't done yet. I want to make sure all the parts are clean. If I am going to reuse the sycnros, there's a diameter of the sycnros when they're installed, and that's something you should check, and also the run out of the input shaft. So that's something else to check on the new shaft to make sure it's not bent before we install something like that. But it doesn't talk anything about the bores, and I don't have the little spec book, which for the 356 was really useful, but I don't know a way to check the bores to see if it needs to be remanufactured or not. And then I think most of the wear would occur here on the ends. So we just slide in some feeler gauges. That's 8 thousandths, which is the limit. I think 0.2 is the limit. So I can't get it in right there, but right at the very tip, it does go in. Let's try the 9 thousandths. The 9 barely goes in. So this selector may be worn. Well, it's not on this side. It's just worn on this side. So that won't go in. Actually, on this side, there's just, you can barely catch it with your fingernail. Slight little groove. I'll show you guys this box here. Now, this is something I picked up over a year ago. This is an entire 915 transmission. I bought this disassembled, and it's not in great shape. Some of the stuff is a little rusty, so the danger of taking something apart is it gets rusty when it's got no oil in it. So you can see like this piece here is pretty rusty, but most of the gears were in pretty good shape. And so this is the one that I need. This is the input shaft, and this I covered it also with some grease, but you can see there, those pieces are not chipped off like they are on mine, and the gear is in good shape. The bearing I can be pressed off and replaced. So I have the first gear for this thing too. This is a complete transmission, actually with gasket set too. Complete gasket set, all the gears are there. I've gone through and cleaned some of them. Some of them are soaking in automatic transmission fluid just to get all the surface rust off of them. But this is gonna be what I'm gonna use to fix this transmission. And the original plan was to build this into a hot rod transmission, make it stronger, use the 831. But for now, I'm gonna have to rob some of the parts to get my car back on the road, and then we'll reevaluate what it's gonna be for the hot rod transmission. These are both like 74 transmissions, magnesium cases and so forth. I'm gonna have the housing looked at by a transmission specialist, probably here in LA. So that's to evaluate the bore and the fit of the pinion bearing in the housing. It's not beat up, but it feels a little bit loose to me. I know that there's a clamping force when you put those carrier plates down. I know it clamps that bearing in, which is probably why it hasn't spun, but I don't know if it's a recommended upgrade on that or not. So I'm gonna have that looked at. So it probably will be another couple weeks before you see another transmission video update, because I'm collecting parts and I'm getting things evaluated by people that know more about the transmissions than even the factory does. The factory doesn't even give you a tolerance for the bore limit there. So we're gonna look at that. You know, I'm not too upset. I don't typically get that upset. You know, this transmission was way worse than I expected, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a big financial impact to me. I'm probably gonna sell off the parts on the second transmission, which will pay for all this. So I'm not completely bummed out. I typically don't get pissed off if something is broken. I mean, this is the way that these cars are. It's actually the opposite. I'm really grateful that I discovered this problem on my own before the transmission just locked up on the freeway or something. If those teeth on the input shaft or those splines on the input shaft were to break anymore and second and third gear just shift over, it could have really ground up those gears, possibly locking the whole transmission. I live in Southern California. You bet there's gonna be someone tailgating me. So that could have been bad. And so rather than get pissed off, I'm actually grateful that this can be fixed, and I actually have the parts already. It's not gonna cost me a fortune, and I'm happy to share it with you guys. So I know the tooling was a little sketchy today. I should have had a wider base on pushing the dog teeth off. So I'm gonna improve that for second gear. We'll get the dog teeth off. Putting them on is actually easier because it's easy to push them back down. This is how I do it, you guys. It's not for everybody. By all means, go buy the tools if you're not sure about welding or doing what I've done. But I'm just here sharing my methods. I know it's unconventional, and I know it's confusing to some of you guys, but this is how I do it. This is how I continue to invest in my car without putting a lot of money into it. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one.